G'day guys and gal. The tale of Magnus the Red is the biggest L a man can endure. Magnus had by far the most potential out of all of his Primarch brothers, and he managed to ruin it and become a bit of a joke due to always managing to pick the worst options when faced with pivotal decisions. But did you know that the fall of Magnus the Red wasn't just do nothing wrong, get clapped by Lehman, join Horus? In truth, it was this very elaborate and compelling story of a man whose spite and brain demanded one thing, but his heart pleaded for another. Even after the burning of Prospero, Magnus still wanted to be a loyalist and even occasionally help the loyalists. Ironically, Vulcan was only around to beat Magnus to death at the end of the heresy due to Magnus directly intervening to allow Vulcan's resurrection. Before we get started, addiction isn't that fun. Unless it's to today's sponsor, Tacticus. As many of you know, I'm not really a mobile gamer, but I've somehow ended up pledging my soul to the greatest Warhammer 40k mobile game ever, that being Tacticus. I literally play every day, and I'm also in the 3rd highest ranked guild. What keeps me hooked isn't just the fact that it's a 40k game, but more so the fact that it actually takes strategy and thought, not just some idle play itself game. If you use the wrong team comp or just do the wrong movements or use your abilities at a bad time, you can get slaughtered. There's also so much gameplay variety, including taking on bosses like Mortarion, holding off wave after wave of Tyranids, taking on other players in live matches, or completing one of the many campaigns. Right now is a fantastic time to jump in, as the Mechanicus faction has just been released with a ton of upcoming events and offers to unlock the Champions of Mars, who have some seriously spicy abilities. So to get hooked on a genuinely great mobile game, then use my link or QR code to download it for free. As a cheeky bonus, use the code MAJORMISS to get a really solid gift, available for both new and existing players. Cheers to Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Today we'll go over the tragic tale of the fall of Magnus the Red, detailing what he did after the fall of Prospero, as well as what loyalist things he did during that time to determine if he has earned his fate as a sharded demon lord or if it truly wasn't his fault. Let's get into it. This video isn't covering the meme Magnus did nothing wrong. We've already spoken about that, and the answer is yes, he did many things wrong. If you're trying to help a kid cross the road, but you think you can do it quickly by pulling the kid along faster, then he trips in a speeding car with a psychotic murder driver, then plows through that kid, turning him into a red paste, you still did something wrong even if you didn't mean to. I'm not going to spend this video retelling Magnus's lore that we already know, but I do want to highlight the period of time between him getting his ass smacked by Lehman Russ and him becoming a full-on demon trader, discussing the tragedy behind it. So the first flaw of Magnus was his monstrous arrogance. It actually wasn't his lack of wisdom. Funnily enough, Magnus was very wise. For example, when Lorgar asked Magnus to take him through the warp to try find gods, Magnus called him a fucking wacko and told him to lick his red nuts. Prospero itself is also a paradise, probably the best place to live in the Imperium if you didn't mind psychic wasps that could impregnate eggs into your brain. With the Thousand Sons Legion being known for their compassion, humanity, and enlightenment, they did not use their warp powers willy-nilly, but were taught a shitload of discipline by Magnus to control their power and use it for good. However, Magnus always thought he knew better, and that people who questioned his heavy reliance on the warp were just ignorant. This landed him in hot water, as the Council of Nicaea resulted in the Emperor banning him and his legion from using their psychic power, because the Emperor saw how arrogant his son was and how his misuse of the warp could ruin everything. The Emperor didn't give a shit about Magnus using the warp to shoot lightning out of his dickhole or to make someone come from 10 kilometers away. It was Magnus's fucked up warp sorcery and rituals that were problematic. The Council was just a poorly executed temporary band-aid to keep his Primarch sons happy and Magnus from doing something retarded while the Biggie worked on his Webway project. However, Magnus decided that he and he alone was the master of the universe. He would play God. So when he was fed a vision of Horus becoming a traitor, he decided that he knew better than the Emperor and his edict. Thus, instead of making the relatively small warp jump to Terra to warn his father in person or attempt to send an astropathic message, he brute forced his way through Terra's psychic shielding, busted a hole in the Webway project, flooding it with demons, before then astrally projecting into the Emperor's throne room like a flaming demon of hell. His warning of Horus didn't mean shit, as Magnus had defied the Emperor's direct edict and ruined mankind's chance of being free of chaos forever. The sorcery he used to do so was also very fucked up, as it literally required a bunch of human psychics to sacrifice themselves like a bunch of fucking sparklers. In a similar ritual, Magnus actually tried to stop Horus from turning traitor, but he went about it in a very arrogant Magnus-y way that put Horus off. Magnus literally held all the cards but played a terrible game, losing the hand in the process. We all know what comes next. The Space Wolves and Custodes come to Prospero to arrest Magnus. However, the influence of Horus and the retardation of Magnus resulted in Lehman Russ attacking Prospero instead. If Magnus had met Lehman's fleet in orbit and broadcasted a surrender, Lehman wouldn't have attacked. Likewise, the Custodians and Sisters of Silence only got involved when the Thousand Suns unleashed their full power and started turning into Chaos Spawns mid-battle. Magnus somehow picked the complete wrong course of action. He allowed his planet to get attacked, then decided to defend it at the last second, causing most of his legion to die and for him to get his spine snapped. Then he went against all his morals and oaths to plead for Titsnitch to take him and his sons to safety. In doing so, his essence was broken into multiple shards, driving him half insane and greatly weakening him. He and his surviving sons were teleported to the planet of sorcerers. Here is where it gets interesting and kind of confusing. At this point, Magnus was still free of chaotic influence. He wasn't yet a demon prince and still technically had free will. Even after getting smacked by Lehman and losing multiple shards, he still wasn't sure if he should join Horus or not. He spoke with Lorgar regularly, but he was also dying, as being broken up to shards isn't good for your health. Despite dicking the shit out of his sons by his poor choices, Ahriman and the Legion were able to recover 4 of the 5 main shards, whilst Magnus looked into the warp to decide who to serve. Initially, he actually started helping the Loyalists. He asked Alfarius to spare Nikonai Sharakin, something that would directly result in the creation of the Primarchs Marines 10,000 years later, and he even helped Artellus Numion get Vulcan's corpse to Nocturne through the Ruin Storm in order to revive him. As a tragic irony, this would result in Magnus's first of many deaths later on. However, Magnus was still lacking his noble shard, the shard of Magnus that wanted to do good, to be loyal, the part of Magnus that convinced everyone that Magnus would never become a traitor. Without this shard, Magnus was a fucking asshole. His main shard in him without it was the power shard, the thing in him that had driven him to make these mistakes in the first place. Despite not having his noble shard, Magnus wanted to be a good boy, so he decided he needed to reclaim his noble shard at all costs. Hence he joined forces with Chaos, with the idea being to use them as a distraction so he could sneak into the Imperial Palace and reclaim his shard, as it was broken off from him not on Prospero, but when he broke into the webway and committed his mistake. Magnus manipulates his traitor brothers during the Siege of Terra and sneaks into the palace. Even now though, he still wanted to be good, saving Imperial refugees from Phosphex bombs. The two sides of Magnus warred with themselves. One side wanted to rip the Emperor's heart out for his perceived betrayal at Prospero and win the war for the traitors. The other side wanted to reclaim his noble shard and stand by the Emperor's side as a redeemed loyal son. Eventually, they encounter Malcador and another Perpetual woman before they begin talking and even playing some chess. Malcador saw Magnus as the most important of all the Primarchs, as with Magnus's help, a lot of the shit that went wrong could be undone. Magnus could sit upon the Golden Throne, allowing the Emperor to rise and lead the Loyalists to victory. Without Magnus, they were pretty fucked. However, when Malcador told Magnus that his noble shard was no longer attainable, as it had been used to create Janus, the first Grandmaster of the Grey Knights, Magnus lost his shit and Turbo Cum blasted Malcador in a fit of rage, genuinely killing Mal despite Mal being a Perpetual. Malcador would later come back to life due to the Perpetual woman giving up her life for him, but it was a solid blast from Magnus. Magnus was pretty shocked at his own actions, but proceeded to the Emperor regardless, intent on killing his father now that his shard was out of reach. When Magnus reached his father, he was given one final chance to undo his mistakes and make things right. The Emperor showed him a path where if he returned to the Loyalists, they could banish the traitors and reclaim the galaxy for the Imperium. Magnus would be given a new legion, and he could sit upon the Golden Throne, forever flying through the Immaterium by his father's side. However, while Magnus could be redeemed, his legion could not. The flesh change could not be stopped, hence the legion must be purged. Magnus's love of his sons meant that he could not go ahead with it, and he rejected the Emperor's offer of redemption, thus damning his soul. Magnus then tries to kill the Emperor, but then Vulcan smacks his nerdy ass. However, before Vulcan could kill Magnus, Magnus finally accepts Titsnitch's offer and becomes a demon prince, instantly getting expelled from the palace due to it being a no demons allowed zone. There was no coming back from this. Magnus had made his final irreversible bad decision and was now 100% committed to the Emperor's death. Magnus enters the webway as a demon and begins a ritual to weaken the Emperor and his psychic wards. Hence Vulcan entered the webway to stop him. The two brothers fight, the Drake versus the demon. Before the heresy, Vulcan and Magnus were close. Vulcan said he was the wisest of them, but that was then. Magnus kills Vulcan time and time again in the most painful ways possible, melting his lungs, decapitation, removal of all of his blood. Nothing worked. If Conrad Curse couldn't kill Vulcan, Magnus wouldn't have a fucking chance. Magnus prepared a final mega attack as Vulcan began getting the upper hand. A psychic attack so deadly it would unmake Vulcan on the atomic level, an attack no one could survive. Magnus blasts Vulcan with his spirit bomb fuck you attack, and Vulcan dies. But he survives! Even as Vulcan is unmade, he hits Magnus so hard in the head that Magnus's head explodes, killing him. But he also survives, as demons don't really die, just get banished. Vulcan is remade as not even Magnus's super attack could do shit against our big cuddly man. Magnus would reform after the end of the heresy, a bitter, hateful man, unable to accept or acknowledge that he and no one else was the ultimate architect of all of his misfortune. He knew that Horus and Chaos were the ones that manipulated him into getting attacked by the Space Wolves, but he is unable to acknowledge his mistakes and make them right. His ego is so fragile and damaged that he would rather burn the galaxy than let it remember his self-inflicted tragedy. His grudge against the Space Wolves is so pathetic, like he is willingly throwing his rage at something tangible so he doesn't have to reflect on himself. Even after reclaiming many more of his lost shards, he is still incomplete. He will never reach his full power or potential, as the remaining shards, tragically made up of mostly his good noble aspects, have either been destroyed or forever lost. The Magnus that was such a caring noble man is dead. All that exists now is a spiteful demon who doesn't know how to take an L. In his quest to do good, he doomed himself and mankind, epitomizing the phrase, "The path to hell is paved with good intentions." If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then Patreon is the place to be, where we have a boatload of Battle Mace 40 million hentai, live action nude cosplays, and a whole lot of Warhammer 40k art. Hit the subscribe button, hit the real subscribe button for more tragic content. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.